Hello, you're listening to Andy's Book Club. If you're new here, welcome. This is a show where we go through an exciting book chapter by chapter on a weekly schedule. Every week, I provide a recap of the chapter we're covering, and I add my commentary as we go along. If something requires more explanation, I might reserve some time at the end of the show and discuss it in more detail. So whether you're studying for a test, writing an essay, or like me, you're just super passionate about reading, this show is perfect for you. As a reminder, this show is available on YouTube, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other platforms. If you're watching this on YouTube, the links for all those other platforms are down below in the description. Or if you prefer, you can simply just search Andy's Book Club directly on your favorite platform. But wherever you might be listening from, if you like the show, be sure to follow and subscribe. This show also has a Twitter page, so if I need to post visuals, I will do so on twitter.com/andysbookclub, so be sure to follow me there. Last week, we left off with the death of Aegon the Conqueror and the gigantic shoes, i.e. the Iron Throne, that he left behind for his son Aenys, who is now the new king. And as we discussed the dynamic between the different members of the Targaryen family, many people, including Aenys' own family members, felt that he may not be the best person to succeed the Iron Throne. Aenys was frail and perceived as weak, and this became problematic as this view was shared by the now Dowager Queen Visenya, who, as we discussed, wanted to see her son Maegor to be the king instead. We can all see where this is going. The challenges for King Aenys would present themselves immediately, as soon as he ascended to the throne. As soon as he became the king, opportunistic lords throughout Westeros saw their chance to strike. Many revolts broke out in the Riverlands and elsewhere in the country. A man named Harren the Red, who claimed to be the grandson of Harren the Black, managed to take over Harrenhal. In reality, this person was unlikely to actually be the grandson of Harren the Black. If you recall from a previous episode, Harren the Black's line had effectively been ended by Dragonflame when he foolishly decided to resist Aegon the Conqueror. Being the Harren the Black's grandson thing was most likely a cover story so that he can have a claim to Harrenhal. An important thing to note is that in Westeros, claims and bloodlines are extremely important. If you want men to follow you, you must be able to justify why you have a claim to power, even if your claim is dubious at best. You at least still need to have one. Anyways, when word of this rebellion reached King Aenys, Lord Tully, the warden of the Riverlands and the Trident, advised Aenys that he should mount his dragon Quicksilver and fly to Harrenhal at once to put down the rebellion. This is definitely something that Aenys' father, Aegon the Conqueror, would have had no trouble doing. However, Aenys, for whatever reason, decided against doing so. The rumor has it that he was just too scared. Recall that his mother, Queen Aenys, had died when her dragon was struck in the eye by a scorpion bolt and fell out of the sky with her still strapped to Dragonback. Aenys decided to wait until an army could be assembled, and marched on Harrenhal with 1,000 men to put down Harren the Red. However, by the time he arrived at Harrenhal, the castle was already empty. Harren the Red had executed all the guards and anyone who resisted him, and abandoned the castle and fled into the woods with his followers. King Aenys was forced to return to King's Landing somewhat empty-handed. Although he had recaptured Harrenhal, Harren the Red was still on the loose. But before he can deal with that, though, he had yet even more trouble. In the Vale, the younger brother of Arryn had deposed his brother and taken over as the Lord of the Vale. Recall, Arryn was the one who Queen Visenya took for a ride on the back of her dragon Vhagar when he was just a boy. Throughout the years, Arryn has served as the Lord of the Vale, but he was now deposed and imprisoned by his brother named Jonos. In the Iron Islands, a man named Lodos, the twice-drowned, rose up in revolt. Again, this is probably not the same person as the original Lodos, who walked into the sea and actually drowned. This was most likely another person pretending that he was the reincarnation of the original Lodos so that he can gain followers and have a claim to rule the Iron Islands. As if things can't get any worse, in Dorne, a man named the Vulture King started to attack Westerosi forces. Recall in episode 3, we talked about how Aegon had made peace with Dorne after reading a letter presented to him by Princess Daria of Dorne. By the way, side note, Dorne, unlike Westeros, was a lot better at giving women equal rights. The reason for this is because the Dornish were descended from the warrior queen Nymeria, who led her people, called the Rhoynar, from Essos to Dorne in an effort to escape the Valyrians, who were conquering everyone by method of dragon flame at the time. This was like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, by the way, but the point is that Dorne had no problem with female rulers. So by now, Princess Daria is now the monarch after she succeeded her father, Nymor. And I emphasize this point just because in future episodes, we are going to talk about succession a lot and recall our discussion on male primogeniture, which is the system that spoiler, ends up getting adopted in Westeros, where only the male heirs would have a claim to the throne and females would be passed over unless there was absolutely no male heirs. It seems like unfair, but this is a contrast between Westeros and Dorne. But anyways, Princess Daria was on good terms with the Iron Throne at this time, so she denounced the Vulture King and discouraged any of her subjects from joining him and taking up arms against the Iron Throne. But many years of war that Aegon had started created some bad blood between the Dornish and the rest of Westeros. There were quite a few Dornish people that flocked to the Vulture King to take revenge against the Iron Throne. As you can see by now, King Aenys had 99 problems, and he had no idea where to even start tackling these problems. In fact, Aenys was somewhat confused and maybe even distraught. It was said that he could not comprehend why so many people would rebel against him. He was under the mindset that, hey, I'm a nice guy. If you had an issue, bring it to me and I would help you. So he was very confused, right? He was like, why would they rebel against me when I haven't done anything bad to them? You see how different Aenys is from his father, right? Aenys is the type of guy who's too nice and people take advantage of him. And this is a huge problem when you're the king. Aenys was also incredibly indecisive. Having finally decided to command one of his lords to take a fleet to the Vale to put down the rebel Jonos Arryn, he rescinded the order at the last minute, fearing that without the fleet, King's Landing would be too undefended. And because Aenys was so indecisive, it came down largely to his lords acting on their own accords, or working with Queen Dowager Visenya to coordinate campaigns to put down the rebellions. In the Vale, it was Lord Allard Royce of Runestone who assembled an army and defeated Jonos in an initial conflict. However, before they can rescue Ronald, who had been imprisoned up until this point, Jonos sent him flying out the Moon Door, which is this trap door that essentially opens up at the top of a mountain. So it's like a 1,000-foot drop into, the abyss. So yeah, unfortunately, Ronald was thrown out the Moon Door and plummeted thousands of feet to his death. Jonos hid inside the Eyrie, which is this castle that House Arryn rules from in the Vale, and it's in an extremely mountainous region, so it's impossible for a large army to attack it. But again, recall how the Targaryens dealt with this problem during Aegon's conquest. Although the Eyrie was impregnable to an army, a dragon could drop on top of you at any moment. So it was now up to Maegor, the son of Aegon and Visenya, riding his father's dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, who descended upon the Eyrie. The castle's defenders immediately surrendered and flipped on Jonos and turned him in. Jonos met the same fate as his brother. Jonos was thrown out the Moon Door, just like what he did to his brother. That's karma, I guess, right? However, what happened next would be somewhat of a foreshadow. Maegor decided that he wasn't going to play nice with traitors. Even though they just surrendered, Maegor did not spare them. The Geneva Conventions does not apply in the world of Westeros, as you can see. So everyone who revolted against the throne was executed, and not in a nice way. So he ordered all of them to be hanged instead of beheaded, right? So this is a distinction, right? So criminals get hanged, and if you wanted an honorable death, they would execute you by sword. So beheading would be a more honorable way of executing someone than hanging someone. So it was also the fact that Maegor ordered everyone to be hanged, even the people who were noble, like the highborn people. So yeah, yikes. You don't mess with Maegor. In the Iron Islands, Lord Greyjoy fought against the rebel Lodos, the new Lodos, the twice-drowned guy, who, again, is a person pretending to be the original Lodos. Greyjoy defeated this new Lodos and promptly separated Lodos' head from his body. Lodos' head was pickled in brine and sent to King's Landing as a gift for King Aenys. Aenys, upon receiving the gift, was tremendously relieved that he now had one less problem to deal with and granted Greyjoy one order of whatever you want. Greyjoy asked for permission to expel all the septons and septas, so basically the holy men and women of the Faith of the Seven, from the Iron Islands. Recall that the Iron Islands have their own religion called the Faith of the Drowned God. Aenys was forced to agree to this since he had already promised. But looking back with hindsight, this proved to be an unwise decision. But we'll just have to circle back to that later. Okay, one more rebellion down. Now the most pressing matter is the Vulture King. Although Princess Daria denounced him and disavowed his actions against the Iron Throne, many would say that she might have been secretly supporting him all along, since she did not field her own armies to put down the Vulture King and allowed him to continue his violent actions against the Iron Throne. But after many battles and various trials and tribulations, it was Lord Samwell Tarly of Hornhill that finally captured the Vulture King. If that name sounds familiar, it is because the Samwell Tarly from the main sequence of the Game of Thrones book and TV show is named after this Samwell Tarly, who is his direct ancestor. The Vulture King, as his punishment for revolting against the Iron Throne, was tied naked between two posts and left to die by exposure. It was said that eventually his body was descended upon by vultures and torn apart. A fitting end for someone named the Vulture King. Now, there was only Harren the Red, who was still out and about and needed to be put down. Harren and his men were cornered in a village west of the God's Eye, and they fought till the very end. In a bizarre turn of events, though, Harren managed to kill the Hand of the King, Alan Stokeworth, in combat, but he was cut down himself by Stokeworth's squire. But the good news is that all the rebellions were now put down. Maegor, now being hailed as a hero for his actions on putting down Jonos Arryn, was made to be the new Hand of the King to his brother Aenys. This, however, was not to last. The brothers were very different in terms of personality, in case you haven't noticed. Deep down inside, did you really think that Maegor would be satisfied with being the Hand of the King to his brother, who he regarded as weak? Maegor was a warrior at heart, and genuinely enjoyed fighting and violence and all that jazz. Aenys enjoyed things like science and alchemy and wearing fine clothes. So we can see the divide within House Targaryen growing wider and wider as the two brothers, the King and the Hand, shared pretty much nothing in common in terms of their personalities. The divide between the two brothers became apparent when Maegor announced that he wanted to take a second wife. His current wife, Lady Cerys Hightower, had failed to produce him an heir. Maegor decided that he would take matters into his own hands and married Alice Harroway, who is the daughter of the new Lord of Harrenhal. This decision was mega controversial. The Faith had made an exception for Aegon having two wives, but they were unwilling to always make exceptions. Besides, Aegon had married his two wives before he came to Westeros, or before he came to the mainland. He was on Dragonstone, whereas Maegor was born and raised in the traditions of Westeros. So no septons were willing to officiate the marriage because they did not approve of polygamy. This didn't stop Maegor, though. It was Queen Dowager Visenya who presided over a Targaryen ceremony, or an old Valyrian ceremony, that wed Maegor and Alice. Aenys was super mad when he found out about this. Maegor had not told Aenys, the king, about such a controversial move that would no doubt jeopardize the relationship between the crown and the faith. The High Septon was even angrier, denouncing both Maegor and Alice and calling Alice the whore of Harroway. Aenys demanded that Maegor put Alice aside and return to his first wife, Cerys. Maegor did not budge. Aenys gave him an ultimatum: either cast Alice aside or be exiled for 5 years. Maegor chose exile. Maegor took Balerion the Black Dread and Alice, along with Aegon's Valyrian steel sword Blackfire, across the narrow sea to Pentos. It was said that Aenys demanded Maegor leave behind Blackfire, the Valyrian steel sword that belonged to Aegon the Conqueror, their father, but Maegor responded, "Your grace is welcome to try and take it from me." So things are getting real spicy now. But on the bright side, though, with his troublesome brother gone in exile and all the rebellions put down for now, Aenys can perhaps finally breathe a sigh of relief. In 41 AC, King Aenys would make an announcement that would shock the nation. He announced that his daughter Rhaena, then 18 years of age, was to be married to his son and her brother, Aegon, Prince Aegon, then 15 years of age. Another sibling marriage. This would not go over well with the Faith of the Seven. So again, remember, the Faith of the Seven, they don't like polygamy, and they definitely do not like incest. Aenys, though, in a weird way, was probably thinking of putting the kids' interests first. Rhaena and Aegon had always been close, and neither of them have shown interest in a whole army of suitors and their parents who would love for their kids to marry a prince or princess. However, perhaps Aenys overestimated his influence on the Faith. He was not Aegon the Conqueror, and the Faith of the Seven was definitely less afraid and more inclined to make their displeasure known to him than they were to his father, Aegon the Conqueror. The Septons of the Faith openly condemned this marriage idea, saying that any children born of the union between two siblings would be an abomination. Queen Dowager Visenya told Aenys that he now had two choices: either walk back this marriage idea, or mount Quicksilver, fly to Old Town, and show the Septons who's really in charge. I have a feeling I know which option Visenya prefers. Aenys, however, as we discussed, was infamous for his indecisiveness. So between these two options that Visenya suggested, he chose neither. Just ignore the problem until it goes away. That's Aenys' favorite way of dealing with a problem. The marriage was to go ahead as planned, and no one was going to get roasted by a dragon. On the day of the wedding, the Warrior Sons, which is a militia group dedicated to the Faith of the Seven, made careful notes as to who was in attendance at the wedding, which they deemed an abomination. Aenys seemed not to notice. At the feast after the wedding, Aenys made a further disastrous blunder. In front of everyone, he proclaimed his son, Prince Aegon, to be the Prince of Dragonstone, ignoring the fact that this title is still currently being held by his brother Maegor, who was in exile in Pentos. For context, the Prince of Dragonstone is a title given to whoever the heir apparent is. So it's the equivalent of the Prince of Wales, if you're familiar with how the British system works in real life, which is no doubt what inspired George R. R. Martin, what he based this on. Anyways, this decision to favor his son Aegon over his brother Maegor as the heir apparent was a blatant attack to anyone who wanted Maegor to be the heir and to be the king one day. The most notable person who was in that camp was, of course, Queen Dowager Visenya. This pissed off Visenya so much that she stormed off without asking for permission to leave, and that night she mounted Vhagar and flew to Dragonstone, implying that Aenys can say whatever he wanted about who was the Prince of Dragonstone, but she was now in charge of Dragonstone and she was going to hold it for her son Maegor. Aenys seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation. He had managed to turn pretty much everyone against him by pissing everyone off, whether accidentally or not, it doesn't matter. The Faith was now fully against him, and he just alienated Queen Dowager Visenya, and he also exiled his brother Maegor. And to exacerbate the problem, the Lords of the Realm have long noticed his indecisiveness and thought of him as weak already, and no one respected him, basically. So Aenys was sliding into quicksand, and he didn't even notice it. The Poor Fellows, who is another religious extremist group, was now in open revolt against Aenys, and referred to him as King Abomination. Eventually, Aenys would slowly come to understand the amount of deep shit he was in. The security situation in King's Landing became so bad that Aenys made plans to escape to Dragonstone with his wife. 3 days before he was set to depart for Dragonstone, A few poor fellows scaled the walls and found their way into the king's bedchamber. Only the timely intervention of the Kingsguard prevented Aenys' reign from ending that very night. Aenys, upon arriving at Dragonstone, was greeted by Queen Dowager Visenya, who immediately disparaged Aenys for being weak. She asked him what he thought his father would do in this situation. Of course, Visenya is right, and I think Aenys deep down inside knew that he was not his father. But Aenys would hear none of it, and ordered Visenya to go away and stop trash-talking him, essentially. By the end of 41 AC, the realm was in deep turmoil. The poor fellows had essentially taken over King's Landing in absence of the king who is now hiding on Dragonstone. And many of the lords of the realm, especially the pious ones who believed in the faith, considered switching their allegiance to the faith instead of continuing to serve Aenys. By now, Aenys was sick in ways more than one. Mentally, he was as indecisive as always, but now plagued by fear, no doubt having been traumatized by that attempt on his life when the poor fellows climbed through his window. He was also physically unwell. It was said that he was, although only 35 years old, he looked like a man in his 60s. Aenys' condition deteriorated rapidly when news came that his son and daughter, Aegon and Rhaena, were surrounded by poor fellows in a place called Craig Hall. So, upon hearing this news, he fainted. And 3 days later, King Aenys was dead. And so ended the reign of King Aenys Targaryen. In retrospect, his reign was a complete disaster. Although it seems like Aenys was a good guy with good intentions, the realm was right to worry about him being king. He was clearly not up to the task. There was also a rumor that Visenya had poisoned him, and this theory makes a lot of sense. During the last days of Aenys' life, Visenya had taken direct charge of taking care of Aenys. This is somewhat suspicious, since it seems like there was a lot of animosity between the two, since Visenya was still no doubt mad at Aenys about him making his son Prince Aegon, the Prince of Dragonstone, and setting aside her son, Maegor. Visenya also despised weakness, and Aenys was kind of the definition of weakness, at least according to her. She probably thought of Aenys as an embarrassment to Aegon the Conqueror's legacy. And by that point, the realm was in full revolt. And Visenya most likely felt like she had to do something to have a chance at saving what Aegon the Conqueror had built. And Aenys was too indecisive to do anything about it, and he was just going to get in the way. Regardless, Aenys was now gone, his body cremated by Dragonflame in the tradition of House Targaryen. Queen Dowager Visenya was not at the funeral. She had mounted Vhagar and flew across the narrow sea. She was ready to bring home her son, who she would name the new king. Alright, I think that is a good spot to end the show for this week. Next week, we'll discuss the power struggle that would ensue as the militias of the Faith of the Seven battle it out with the Targaryens in the power vacuum and the absolute mess left by King Aenys. So I hope you all enjoy the episode this week. I hope you all enjoy listening, and I'll see you guys next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.